Listen, I got my tank top on, I have my sunglasses, and today we're going to be doing a fan build that I've probably wanted to do for the longest time now. My cat's coughing. Immediately my cat is coughing. Anyway, today I'm going to be recreating Lara Croft's home from the original Tomb Raider trilogy. This is a series that has a very special place in my heart. It's one of the first, I think, sort of action-adventure games that I played as a kid. Let me take these off. I sunk so many hours into Tomb Raider 2 as a kid. I think, honestly, this was a precursor for why I liked The Sims as much as I did, or maybe just an indication that I would like The Sims as much as I did. I spent so many hours in the tutorial level inside Lara's home, just running around doing nothing. I think one of the reasons why I have such a close correlation between Tomb Raider and The Sims is because way back when I was playing The Sims 2, I used to download a lot of custom content. Now I'm a lot more of a sort of vanilla player, but I used to download a ton of custom content, and I remember finding the most accurate recreation of this house in The Sims 2 ever. It was so cool. The person who made it actually used the textures from the game, they uploaded them as custom content and used them in the recreation of the house, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. So of course I was playing this on a family computer, and I remember we got a new computer and I lost all of my save files. And to top it all off, I wasn't able to find that custom content ever again. I couldn't find it. And it was just devastating. So in a lot of ways, I was very excited to revisit the Croft Manor in as much detail as possible and make my own take on what the Croft Manor would look like if it were in The Sims. Today, we're going to be starting off with a speed build of the exterior of the building, and then the second half of the video will be more of a virtual tour as we check out the interior of the building. I figured that it took a lot of time to find all the objects, and I wanted to make sure it was as accurate as possible. So I was constantly like clicking back and forth between a emulated version of the game and screenshots and The Sims to make sure that I was like picking the right objects and putting them in the right place. So one thing that was actually very interesting about working on this building is that when I do these kind of fan builds, a lot of times I'm working off of reference images and videos, lines of script, things like that, that are not a complete realization of a space. They're usually like fractions of the overall place. But this building, for all intents and purposes, is pretty much completely rendered. So when you play, The Sims, when you play Tomb Raider 1, 2, or 3, you really can walk around almost all of Lara's home. And that was great for me as I was working on this because I could spend a lot of time inside the building, taking sort of the best measurements that I could to make something feel as accurate and real to the original games as I could. And one thing that I noticed as I was working on this is it seems like the original rooms have a lot of space between them. What I mean by that is like there's almost like dead space that you just can't access. So let's say between the bedroom and the front of the building, there is a ton of space that just isn't a room and is not accessible. So I did have to account for that in some of the decisions that I made, but for the most part, it was really cool to just be able to do my best to do like a one-for-one recreation of what is already there and available in the original series. Now this build does have the training grounds that are in the back of the building from Tomb Raider 2, and then I also included the maze that gives you access to the treasure room in the same game. I really thought that those were critical to include, so we have a interesting combination of walls and platforms and eventually some crate objects from Cat and Dogs to recreate that sort of obstacle course in the back of the house. There were only a few platforms that I wasn't able to fit, but it really is the exact progression of platforms and obstacles that you would find in the second game. And then another thing I noticed that was surprising to me was that the perimeter wall is so tall. When I first was kind of like planning this out, I was going to do half walls and then I was going to do fences, and then I realized that they're actually massive. So in this version, they are actually a full story tall, and then I even have a platform on top of them. And then another thing that I noticed is that in the games, these walls actually have carvings on them. They're like these low relief sculptures on them. And so I was like, wait a minute, we can recreate that. Because with Jungle Adventure, we got those like huge stone plates that you can hang on the walls. They're technically wall sculptures. And there were like 8 or 9 different variations that I was able to put around the interior and exterior of this perimeter wall. So it ended up working perfect. I feel like the sort of illusion is very convincing. It's very similar to the source material, so I was really happy with how that came out. And so now we're going to be working on the roof Tomb Raider has a very famous roof glitch where you can jump in a specific way and end up on the roof. And what you find when you get up there is that unfortunately, it is a unfinished environment, so there's just a bunch of random polygons and geometry up there that have the second story wallpaper mapped to them. So it's not as exciting once you get up there, but it is pretty cool because everything is climbable. So for this, I wanted to create something that actually looked nice, and instead, I referenced the loading screen from the second game. So when you go to the Croft Manor for the tutorial of the game, you're treated to this one fully rendered image of what the Croft Manor is meant to look like. And what we see there is that the Croft Manor is meant to have a bunch of chimneys, this sort of like taupey color roof, and then there are also battlements, like you would find on a castle, sort of. So I recreated that shape using 2 different heights of half walls. So now we're just putting on some finishing touches here to bridge the gap between a very low poly count house from a PlayStation era game to what we have in The Sims 4. So just doing some very subtle kind of embellishments here to make everything feel nice. And then I also, because there's such a focus on gardens around the house, I did want to include some areas where your Sims could garden if you wanted to download this. So we have an area in the front of the house that has plant pots, and then also, as in game, just at the end of the obstacle course, there's an area that has multiple trees there, which are plantable. Of course, you could change these out to just regular trees if you would like to, but I thought that that was a great way to add in a little bit of gameplay around the house because most of the exterior is inaccessible. And you can see here, I'm just adding the finishing touches on the obstacle course. So I used these wooden planks from the debug menu to create a sort of rope bridge. And then I also raised up a cable and stretched it from one platform to the next to sort of do a makeshift zip line. I do end up changing out these wooden planks for a different set towards the end of the build. And this is because for this build, I kind of just free built. I just used any packs and objects that I wanted to create something as realistic as I could, or as accurate as I could. And then towards the end of the build, I checked to see how many packs I had used, and any packs where I was just using like 1 or 2 objects that were kind of inconsequential, I just ended up removing the objects. I wanted this to be as accessible as possible. I know that everybody doesn't have every pack, so I wanted to limit my pack usage as much as I could, but still have the most accurate building as I could. So one of the packs I realized I wasn't using was Island Living, and those planks were from Island Living, so I ended up pulling those out and replacing them from something with something from Cats and Dogs. And lastly, we're just adding in some vines that are growing up the perimeter wall. These are all over the place in the original games, and I wanted to make sure that we had that here as well. So I ended up putting them in a bunch of different spots just to make everything feel really overgrown and lush, because Miss Lara is a busy woman. You know, she's not around tending to these plants all the time. So yeah, here is the finished exterior of the building. And I'm really happy with how this came out. It feels like a really close representation of the original game. And honestly, just like not even playing the game, but just moving around in this as I was kind of taking the screenshots and the video for this build made me feel very nostalgic, and it really brought me back to playing The Sims 2 and having that person's amazing recreation of this same building. But now we're going to move into the virtual tour portion of this video. So first we're going to check out the maze. If you remember, in the original games, here you press a switch and then there's like a time challenge where you have to run inside, so you can go into this like secret door that opens up and then you get access to the treasure room. I couldn't do all that here, and I wanted to have access to that room from the interior and exterior of the building, so that is actually an exterior entrance to the treasure room, which is closely guarded by a very difficult hedge maze. Here is our training grounds, so here's our obstacle course. You can't see it here, it's cut off in that shot there, but I did end up putting some cheerleading mats on top of the very first platform there. I thought, again, most of this area out here is not playable, so I thought it might be nice to have at least 1 or 2 objects that your Sims would be able to use. And we also have a telescope there out on Lara's porch. That would be a great place for some plant pots as well, if that's something that you like for your Sims to do. And here you can see the updated drawbridge. Like I was mentioning earlier, I switched this out for the ones that I was using earlier. If you have Island Living, I do happen to think they looked a little bit better than this one, but I think this works out just fine anyway. And as we go down the zip line, we find ourselves at the end of the obstacle course and facing the garden with some very nice trees. And then I also ended up, again, just putting some exercise equipment out here. I just wanted to have as many different points of interaction as I could while still maintaining the original look and feel of the build from the game series. But yes, now it is finally time to go inside. And as we move through the doors, we enter Lara Croft's Manor, and we see the two massive double staircases greeted by a big grandfather clock, a bunch of crates that she hasn't been able to get to yet. Next, we will move into the ballroom. Now, in the third game, this is actually split up into two separate rooms. One side on the left is set up as a dining room, and the other one, I think, is an obstacle course, but still a massive ballroom that leads into the pool. For this, I chose to keep both rooms open like it was in the second Tomb Raider game, but I did still want this to be a functional house, so I set the left side up as a dining space. You can see we have our stereo there playing some very aggressive violins. And then we move straight ahead into our kitchen. So here is Lara's very famous kitchen, and I'm sure you've already noticed that, of course, we have a massive freezer that is included in this kitchen. One might say too large of a freezer. But yeah, if you've played the original games, you know why this is important. So here is our freezer room. We have a nice big double fridge in here, a wonderful selection of meats that are spending some time curing in the freezer. And it also looks like I left a tray of tea in there. Sorry about that. If you download this, you can feel free to delete it. But yeah, that's our kitchen. We also have some nice herbs hanging up, drying out there. This was something that was built into the texture of the original games. The walls were textured with hanging herbs and hanging pots and pans. Luckily, we have some objects that can replace them instead. But yeah, that's our kitchen. It's a little bit smaller than in the games. One thing I noticed is that in the games, the rooms are so massive. I think just to feel, grand, but they're so massive. In this build, they are a little bit more appropriately sized, I think, for a building of this size. So you can see we have this ballroom set up for a party. I also included one of these tables here that has a punch bowl on them. Now we're going to enter Lara's very iconic pool room. How many of y'all died here as a kid? Can you be honest with me? I just remember pressing play on that stereo, letting those violins rip, and then going in and accidentally drowning in the pool. The pool room is such a cool room. It has a very specific look to it, and one of the things I always remember loving was that it was just covered in red marble. So I did my best to recreate that here. And then this room also uses the same textures as the perimeter wall. So there are those sort of like low relief sculptures all over the place on the walls here. So I did the same thing where I tried to include them here in the pool room as well. And then my game was like glitching out here. If you're in first person mode, you can't see the glass ceiling and the objects that are sitting on top of platforms at the same time for some reason. I don't know. It was very strange. So you can see here, there's like a cut in the video where some plants and statues fade in. I just wanted you to be able to see both the effect of the glass ceiling and also the objects that are placed on platforms in the room. So I'll also include some screenshots at the end that I've like sort of manipulated in Photoshop just so you can see both of them at the same time. All right, so now we're going to go back through the ballroom into the foyer, and then here we're going to check out a room that's actually included in the third Tomb Raider game. This is, I've seen it called a couple different things. It's a treasure room, it's an achievement room, I don't know what it's called, but it's a secret room from the third game that has a bunch of little nods to the past events of the Tomb Raider series. So a bunch of different relics that Lara has found, and then there also is a mask that's a Indiana Jones reference that's included on one of these pedestals. But yeah, here's the achievement room. In the games, there's a T-Rex head that's literally mounted to the wall above the fireplace. Absolutely ridiculous, but fortunately we have a dinosaur head that I was able to include here from the Get Famous pack, just as ridiculous. And then from this room, we'll move upstairs, and the first room that we're going to check out is actually the music room? I don't know what to call this. We'll call it the music room. But here's a piano. And then also in the first Tomb Raider, this is where the sort of training grounds are, or this is where you learn how to jump, basically. There's a huge mat on the ground. That's why I included the blue cheerleading mat on the floor up here in this rendition. And then attached to the music room is the library. The library is very simple. If I remember right, I don't think that there is ever... Oh no, there was in one of the games. In one of the games, there's a secret in the wall. But otherwise, it's a very simple room. There's nothing going on in there except for some bookshelves. So I wanted to do something, again, that had some merit in terms of gameplay, and this is where I included a little sort of research area for Lara. So we have a computer here and a desk that was not featured in the original series, but I thought this would be a perfect place to put it. And we have some kind of just paper strewn about, some blueprints and things like that, where Lara is planning her next adventure. And we're not going to talk about it now. We'll check it out at the end of this tour. But here in this little hallway, I ended up tucking in a little tiny bathroom in one of those gaps that I mentioned earlier between the interior and the exterior wall. There was just some space there that I figured could be used a little bit better. So I ended up putting a small bathroom in there because Lara's mansion only has one bathroom in it and it's attached to her bedroom. So I thought, I have the space, may as well use it. It doesn't have to be completely accurate, especially when this was just dead space in the original. So now we're going to move into the second room upstairs, which is the attic. This room has various appearances through all three games. I wanted to use this as a rec room. So like all three games, we have a bunch of crates and things like that sitting around, but I also included some exercise equipment up here and a little pong table just for some fun. And then the last room that we're going to look at on the second floor is Lara's bedroom. Famously empty. In the game, she really just has a bed, a shades lounge, and a bathroom. That's it. In my build, I ended up putting a wardrobe in there with some suitcases, some luggage as well, which we'll see later on. Now, the bathroom in the series has an incredible bathtub that is built into the ground. And I figured, of course, we can't do that here, and we can't put fountains on inside a house or on the second level. So instead, I used one of those gaps, one of those dead spaces in the build as a pool instead. So there's actually a small pool up here on the second floor, which you can't see at all from the first floor. It's hidden inside the walls. And then I also included a door that goes out onto the balcony. That doesn't exist in the original games either for some reason, but I figured, of course, we needed that here. We have the balcony, we may as well use it. So that is just about every room inside of the building. Oh, you can see my Whoville build out there. That is so funny. Anyway, those are most of the rooms on the interior of this build. Now we're going to check out basically the last spot, which is the treasure room in the basement of the manor. So like I was mentioning earlier, there are two ways that you can access this. One from the interior and one from the exterior of the building. So we will enter through the exterior entrance, which is inside the hedge maze. And if you go down this ladder, here we find ourselves in Lara's treasure room. So this was such an interesting room in the original games. I remember being so chuffed when I found it as a kid. Yeah, my memory of this room is just that there are all these glass windows and behind them are piles and piles and piles of inaccessible gold. So I did my best to recreate that here by putting as many objects that felt expensive and like, little tiny treasures as I could throughout the object catalog. If you saw my Addams Family build, which I'll link here if you'd like to check it out, there's also a massive treasure room in that build where I used a lot of the same objects actually. But yeah, that's the treasure room. And then I just wanted to show you the other entrance here as well. So if we go out here and instead go up this ladder, which is inside the treasure room, it takes us to a secret entrance behind this bookcase. And this is located in a tiny little hallway that is an offshoot from the foyer of the building. So if we go out here, you can see, we'll take a right, and here we are at the entrance of the entire building. In the original games, this is a secret door that's underneath the staircases, and unfortunately, it's just not something you can do in The Sims. So I ended up putting the entrance to the basement in a very similar area, sort of logistically, but the way that you get there is obviously a little bit different. And before we wrap up today, I just wanted to give you a couple different views of this build. I know that sometimes these virtual tours are really helpful in kind of understanding what these places look like, but there's nothing really that replaces the feeling of moving around and using the in-game cameras as you would when you were just playing the game normally. So I like to include both gameplay footage and also these overviews of the layout. So here is the general layout of each of the floors that are included in this build. This is a pretty simple layout. I don't really think that this was probably all that confusing as we were moving through it, but just in case, I wanted to make sure to include it. And now we're just going to move around a bit using the Sims 4 camera, putting the walls up and down so you can kind of get a feel for the space in a normal gameplay scenario. And yeah, I think as I move around here, I think you can start to see too what I was mentioning earlier, how there are so many areas of this build that are just gaps. They're just kind of like unused space between walls of different rooms. I'm so not used to building like that. And I even noticed as I was playing the game, like actually going into the original games, I noticed that there are certain windows on the exterior of the building that lead to nothing. They just have like a black wall behind them. So there are some instances of that here as well. I don't know, it's just very interesting. But if you want to download this and expand it in any way, maybe make a bedroom for a butler, there are many opportunities for you to do that. Here we are on the second floor, and there are two rooms up here actually that I wanted to mention really quickly that we didn't check out. The first one is that secondary bathroom that I had mentioned earlier. It's just a little half bath, nothing major to write home about, but it's a little half bath. And then here is my little nod to Lara's closet. Lara's closet has a very famous history, and I couldn't fit it in the bedroom the way that I had laid it out. So I ended up including it in the hallway on the second floor instead, and you notice that she has some fun objects in there if you would like to check them out. I would personally prefer to keep that locked. So that is my take on Lara Croft's Manor from the original Tomb Raider trilogy. I don't know what it is, but as I was working on this, once I finished it, I was so geeked. I have such vivid memories of running around this house in Tomb Raider and then also in The Sims 2, so it feels very nice indeed to have my own version of this in my game that I can play with whenever I want. Speaking of which, if you would like to download this, it is now available for download in the Sims 4 gallery. My name on the gallery is the same as it is here, which is just Patrick Creates, so feel free to check it out and let me know what you think. And speaking of what you think, if you like this video, please like the video. That would be so helpful. I really appreciate that. And I do builds like this every week. If you'd like to see more builds like this, first of all, I actually made a playlist of my fan builds, which I will link at the end of this video, so you can check that out if you would like. And I upload videos every week, so think about subscribing and come back next time. I think that's all I have for this week's video. I hope that y'all enjoyed taking a trip down memory lane with me, and I hope to see you next time. So until next time, y'all.